September 10th, 2020, early morning. A video surfaced online that would destroy a $9 billion company in hours. It was simple, 38 seconds long. No special effects, no elaborate production, just a pickup truck, towing a semi-truck down a hill. The semi-truck was a Nikola 1, the hydrogen-powered vehicle that was supposed to revolutionize transportation. The truck that had taken the company public just months earlier. The vehicle that investors valued at $34 billion, more than Ford. But in this video, it wasn't running. It was being towed, pulled by a rope, down a hill, to create the illusion of movement for promotional footage. The revelation was devastating, because Nikola had shown that exact footage to investors, to the media, to the public. A video of their truck, driving down a highway. Smooth, powerful, revolutionary, except it wasn't driving, it was rolling, down a carefully selected slope, with clever camera angles making it look like the vehicle was powered, when actually it couldn't move on its own at all. The company's founder, Trevor Milton, had stood on stages promising to transform the trucking industry. Hydrogen fuel cells that would replace diesel. Zero emissions, lower operating costs, the future of freight transportation. He'd attracted investments from General Motors, Bosch, major institutional funds, convinced thousands of retail investors to buy stock, built a company valued at billions, based on technology that didn't work. And it all fell apart because of one video, showing the truth that Milton had been hiding. The truck was fake. The technology was years away. The promises were lies. Within weeks, Milton would resign in disgrace. Within months, he'd face criminal charges. Within a year, the stock would lose 90% of its value. This is that story, of ambition that became fraud, of promises that were lies, and of the $9 billion that evaporated when reality caught up to fiction. To understand how Nikola became a fraud, you need to understand the world it emerged into, and why people were so desperate to believe. 2015. Tesla had proven that electric vehicles could work, not just golf carts. Real cars, fast, desirable, cool. Elon Musk had transformed the auto industry by making electric vehicles something people actually wanted. Tesla's stock was soaring. Investors were pouring money into anything related to electric transportation, clean energy, zero emissions, the future. And everyone wanted to find the next Tesla. Trevor Milton saw an opportunity. If electric cars were the future, what about electric trucks? Not pickup trucks. Semi-trucks. The 18-wheelers that move freight across America. They consume enormous amounts of diesel, produce massive emissions. If someone could electrify trucking, that would be huge. But there was a problem. Batteries. Semi-trucks need to haul heavy loads long distances. Current battery technology couldn't provide enough range without making the trucks so heavy they'd barely carry cargo. Milton claimed to have a solution: hydrogen fuel cells. Instead of batteries, trucks would carry compressed hydrogen, feed it into fuel cells that generate electricity, power electric motors. The only emission would be water vapor. It was an appealing concept. Hydrogen trucks could refuel quickly like diesel trucks, could travel long distances, could carry full loads, all while being zero emission. Milton founded Nikola Motor Company in 2014, named after Nikola Tesla, the inventor, not the car company, though the association was obviously intentional. The logo even looked similar. Everything about Nikola was designed to evoke Tesla. Milton wasn't an engineer, wasn't a scientist. His background was in sales and alarm systems. But he was charismatic, confident, visionary sounding. He spoke about hydrogen trucks the way Musk spoke about electric cars, with conviction, certainty, revolutionary rhetoric, and people wanted to believe, because if he was right, if hydrogen trucks could work, the market was enormous. There are millions of semi-trucks in America, billions of dollars in fuel costs, massive environmental impact. Milton started showing concept trucks, beautiful designs, sleek, futuristic. The Nikola 1, the Nikola 2, the Badger pickup truck. Each one more ambitious than the last. He made bold promises. Production would start in 2020. Customers could pre-order now. Refundable $1,000 deposits. He claimed thousands of orders worth billions. Said Nikola would have operational hydrogen fueling stations. Said the technology was proven and ready. But here's what investigators later discovered. Almost none of it was true. The trucks were shells. Beautiful exteriors with nothing inside. The hydrogen technology wasn't proven. It was theoretical. The production timeline was fantasy. And the orders? Many were from companies that didn't actually exist or weren't binding commitments. But Milton presented everything with absolute confidence. Posted on social media constantly. Attacked critics. Called doubters idiots. Compared himself to Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. And in the world of startups and venture capital, confidence matters more than reality, at least temporarily. In June 2020, Nikola went public. Not through a traditional IPO, but through a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company. A shell company that merges with a private company to take it public quickly. Less scrutiny than normal IPOs. The deal valued Nikola at $3.3 billion. Within days of trading, the stock soared. Hit a peak valuation of $34 billion. More than Ford. More than Fiat Chrysler. A company with zero revenue. Zero production vehicles. Zero proven technology. Worth more than established automakers producing millions of vehicles annually. Trevor Milton became a billionaire on paper. His stake was worth billions. He appeared in media celebrating. Posted photos of himself with the trucks. Promised deliveries would start soon. General Motors noticed. They were struggling to compete with Tesla in electric vehicles. Needed to show they could innovate. And if Nikola had working technology, why not partner with them? In September 2020, GM announced a deal. They'd take an 11% stake in Nikola, worth $2 billion at the time. In exchange, GM would engineer and manufacture the Badger pickup truck. They'd provide fuel cell technology, credibility, manufacturing expertise. The deal seemed to validate everything Milton had claimed. If General Motors was partnering with Nikola, the technology must be real, right? But 2 days after the GM deal was announced, everything collapsed. A short seller firm called Hindenburg Research published a report. It was devastating. 76 pages of detailed allegations, documented evidence, interviews with former employees. The report's title was blunt. Nikola: How to Parlay an Ocean of Lies into a Partnership with the Largest Auto OEM in America. Here's what they found. The promotional video of the Nikola 1 driving. The truck was being towed. Nikola had rented a closed section of road with a slight downhill grade. Positioned cameras to hide the slope. Released the truck's brakes and let gravity do the work. Then edited the footage to look like the truck was driving under its own power. Former employees confirmed this. Said they'd been told to help stage the video. That everyone internally knew the truck couldn't actually drive. That the whole production was theater designed to fool investors. The hydrogen fuel cell technology? Mostly non-functional. The fuel cells in the prototype trucks were barely operational. Couldn't provide enough power for sustained driving. Overheated after brief use. Were years away from being commercially viable. The thousands of orders. Many were from shell companies. Others were non-binding expressions of interest. Some were from companies that later said they never seriously intended to buy. The hydrogen fueling stations Nikola claimed to be building hadn't broken ground, had no secured locations, no permits, no concrete plans beyond promotional materials. Former employees told Hindenburg that Milton routinely made up technical specifications, would promise features the engineers said were impossible, would announce timelines that everyone internally knew couldn't be met, and when engineers pushed back, they were fired or ignored. One particularly damning allegation: Milton had claimed the Nikola 1 could drive over 1,000 miles on a single tank of hydrogen. Engineers calculated it could maybe do 300 miles. Maybe. If everything worked perfectly. Which it didn't. The report also detailed Milton's history. Before Nikola, he'd run a natural gas vehicle company called D-Hybrid. That company had failed. Faced lawsuits from customers claiming the vehicles didn't work as promised. And throughout everything, Milton had one strategy: attack critics aggressively. Call them short sellers trying to profit from lies. Threaten lawsuits. Rally his supporters on social media. Never address the substance of allegations. But Hindenburg's report was too detailed, too well documented, too damning. September 20th, 2020. 10 days after the Hindenburg report, Trevor Milton resigned as chairman of Nikola. The company announced his departure in a brief press release. He was stepping down to focus on defending himself. His resignation was an admission. Not legally, but practically. Because if the allegations were false, why resign? Why not stay and fight? Milton never sued Hindenburg, because truth is a defense against defamation. And the allegations were true, provably true, documented true. The stock collapsed, lost half its value immediately. Investors panicked. The GM deal was suddenly in doubt, and Nikola faced an existential crisis. Investigations began. The SEC opened an inquiry. The Department of Justice started looking into potential fraud, and former employees started talking. What emerged was a picture of systematic deception. Milton hadn't just exaggerated. He'd lied, repeatedly, about fundamental aspects of the business. The battery technology Nikola claimed to have developed, purchased from a third party, the inverters, off-the-shelf components, the software, basic and incomplete, the manufacturing expertise, non-existent. They'd planned to outsource everything, and the company culture was toxic. Former employees described an environment where questioning Milton was career suicide, where unrealistic promises were made to investors and employees were expected to make them reality somehow. One engineer told investigators about a meeting where Milton promised customers a specific power output. The engineer explained it was physically impossible with current technology. Milton's response? Make it work. I already told them we can do it. That engineer was fired 3 weeks later for not being a team player. General Motors realized they'd been fooled. They renegotiated the deal, reduced their stake, canceled plans for the Badger pickup truck, essentially backed away from the partnership as much as possible without admitting they'd screwed up. Because admitting they'd been fooled was embarrassing. GM is supposed to have world-class engineers, deep automotive expertise, rigorous deal processes. How did they miss that Nikola's technology was vapor? The answer is that GM wanted to believe. They needed a hydrogen story, needed to show they were innovating. And Milton's confidence, combined with the stock market valuation, made Nikola seem legitimate. Let me tell you about Nathan Anderson. He's the founder of Hindenburg Research, the short seller who exposed Nikola, and the man Trevor Milton called a criminal. Anderson isn't your stereotypical Wall Street type. He'd started his career as a healthcare analyst, got interested in short selling after seeing companies making impossible medical claims, realized that calling out fraud could be both profitable and moral. Anderson spent months investigating Nikola. His team interviewed dozens of former employees, analyzed hundreds of documents, tracked down sources, verified claims, built a case so solid that even Nikola's lawyers couldn't effectively challenge it. The report was released for free. Anyone could read it. No paywall. Just 76 pages of documented fraud available to the world. And immediately, Anderson became a target. Milton called him a criminal and con artist on Twitter. Nikola's supporters harassed him online. Death threats started arriving. Accusations that he was manipulating the market. The irony was painful. Anderson had exposed fraud, documented lies, protected investors, and he was being treated like the criminal. But Anderson expected this. The pattern was always the same. Expose fraud. Get attacked. Eventually be proven right. Watch the stock collapse and the executives face consequences. Anderson made money from his Nikola short position. That's how short selling works. But the money came from being right about fraud. From doing investigative work that regulators and journalists should have done earlier, but didn't. And his report prevented further losses. Because after it was published, investors knew the truth, could make informed decisions, were no longer being deceived by Milton's lies. There's another person whose story matters. A former Nikola engineer. Let's call him Mark. Mark joined Nikola excited, believed in the vision, wanted to build hydrogen trucks that would change transportation. He had a PhD in mechanical engineering, had worked for major automotive companies. His first week, he realized something was wrong. The fuel cell technology was primitive, years behind what Milton was promising publicly. Mark raised concerns, got told Trevor knows what he's doing. Over months, Mark watched Milton make impossible promises, saw engineers pressured to validate claims they knew were false, observed a culture where loyalty to Trevor was more important than technical reality. Mark left, but he'd signed an NDA. Couldn't speak publicly about what he'd seen. Couldn't warn investors. just had to watch Milton continue making impossible claims. When Hindenburg published their report, Mark felt vindicated. Everything he'd witnessed was now public. Finally, people knew the truth. But here's what prosecutors discovered when they investigated Trevor Milton. Milton knew the technology didn't work, knew the demonstrations were fake, and he'd planned to cash out before anyone discovered the truth. Between Nikola's public listing and his resignation, Milton sold stock worth hundreds of millions. He'd claimed these were routine transactions, diversification, financial planning. But prosecutors saw a pattern. Milton was selling aggressively, more than typical for founders. He was liquidating his position as fast as insider trading rules would allow. Why? Because he knew the truth would come out eventually. Knew that once production was supposed to start, everyone would realize the trucks didn't work. So he was cashing out, converting paper wealth into real money before the house of cards collapsed. Prosecutors charged Milton with fraud in July 2021. 3 counts of criminal fraud, facing decades in prison if convicted. The indictment detailed specific lies, statements Milton made to investors that he knew were false, claims about technology, orders, capabilities that had no basis in reality. Milton pleaded not guilty. His lawyers argued he was an optimistic visionary, that his statements were forward-looking predictions, not fraudulent misrepresentations. But prosecutors had evidence showing Milton knew. Emails where engineers explained why certain claims were impossible. Internal documents showing the real state of the technology. Former employees testifying about Milton overruling technical objections. The trial began in September 2023. Prosecutors presented messages where Milton told associates to lie about the truck's capabilities. Testimony from engineers who'd been pressured to validate false claims. One particularly damning piece of evidence: a text message from Milton to an associate. "The truck can't drive more than a few miles, but don't tell anyone." Sent days before a promotional event where Milton told investors the truck had extensive range capability. In October 2023, the jury convicted Milton on 3 counts of fraud. He faced up to 25 years in prison, and here's another revelation. Milton wasn't the only one who knew. Multiple Nikola executives suspected the technology was oversold. Some raised concerns internally. Others just went along because the stock was soaring. Their equity was becoming valuable. And questioning Trevor meant losing their jobs. This created a culture of complicity. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to be the person who stopped the party. The Nikola scandal exposed fundamental problems with how we value companies, how we distinguish vision from fraud. First, the SPAC problem. Nikola went public through a SPAC merger. This process has less oversight than traditional IPOs. Companies don't have to provide the same level of financial disclosure. This created an opportunity for fraud. Milton could make wild projections, promise future revenue, describe technology that didn't exist yet, and face less scrutiny. After Nikola collapsed, regulators started looking more carefully at SPACs. The SEC implemented new rules, increased disclosure requirements. But dozens of companies had already gone public through SPACs making similar promises. Second, the retail investor problem. Much of Nikola's stock was held by retail investors. Regular people who'd bought shares based on Milton's promises, who believed in the hydrogen vision, who wanted to invest in clean energy. These investors lost billions when the stock collapsed. Many had bought near the peak, believed Milton's claims, trusted that a NASDAQ-listed company must be legitimate. But they didn't have the resources to verify. Couldn't hire investigators like Hindenburg. They had to rely on publicly available information, which was carefully curated by Milton to look impressive while hiding the truth. Third, the General Motors problem. How did one of the world's largest automakers nearly partner with a fraud? How did their due diligence miss what a short seller discovered in months? Part of the answer is perverse incentives. GM needed a hydrogen story, needed to show they were innovating. So when Nikola appeared, with impressive trucks, charismatic founder, multi-billion valuation, it seemed like the perfect partnership. GM wanted it to be real, so they didn't look as hard as they should have. Asked questions but accepted answers too easily, and ultimately made a decision based partly on hope. Fourth, the hydrogen question. Nikola's fraud doesn't mean hydrogen trucks are impossible. Many legitimate companies are working on hydrogen fuel cell technology. Hydrogen might eventually play a role in decarbonizing transportation, but Nikola set the industry back, made investors skeptical of hydrogen companies, made legitimate startups seem suspect, created an association between hydrogen trucks and fraud that will take years to overcome. September 10th, 2020. A 38-second video destroyed a $9 billion company, showed a truck being towed down a hill, exposed a fraud that had fooled General Motors, sophisticated investors, and financial markets. Trevor Milton is in prison now, convicted of fraud, facing years behind bars. His billions in stock wealth evaporated, his reputation destroyed, his hydrogen vision exposed as lies. But the story doesn't end with his conviction, because the question remains, how did it happen? How did someone with no technology fool so many people for so long? The answer is uncomfortable, because it reveals that our systems for evaluating companies are broken, that we value confidence over competence, marketing over substance, vision over reality. Trevor Milton was a brilliant salesman. He understood that in the startup world, the story matters more than the product, at least initially. If you can sell the vision, if you can convince people you're building something revolutionary, they'll give you money, lots of money. And once you have money and a high stock valuation, you have credibility. People assume success implies substance, that billion-dollar valuations mean real technology. Milton exploited these assumptions, built a facade of success, beautiful trucks that didn't work, impressive presentations with no substance, a multi-billion-dollar valuation based on lies. Until one short seller did what regulators, journalists, and investors should have done earlier. Investigated, verified, exposed the truth. Nathan Anderson and Hindenburg Research saved investors billions, not through regulation or oversight, through old-fashioned investigative work, and profiting from being right about fraud. The Nikola scandal wasn't unique, it was just more obvious than most. The fake demonstrations were too blatant, the lies were too documented. But how many other Nikolas are out there? Companies with impressive presentations and questionable technology? Founders making promises they can't keep? Startups valued in billions despite having no revenue? The answer is many. Because the incentives reward deception. Stock markets value growth over profitability. Investors chase vision over execution. Trevor Milton bet that he could fake it until he made it. That if he raised enough money, hired enough engineers, made enough noise, somehow the technology would materialize. It didn't. Because you can't fake physics, can't market your way to working fuel cells, can't convince engineering problems to solve themselves through sheer confidence. And when reality caught up, when the demonstrations were exposed as fake, when the technology was revealed as vapor, when the lies became undeniable, $9 billion disappeared. The hydrogen hoax is over. Nikola still exists technically, trying to build real trucks with real technology. But the valuation is gone, the vision is tarnished, and Trevor Milton is in prison. But the lesson remains. That fraud can wear the costume of innovation. That lies can be packaged as vision. That confidence can substitute for truth, until suddenly it can't. And that a 38-second video of a truck being towed down a hill can destroy billions in wealth, when that wealth was based on nothing more substantial than the hill itself. Gravity is real, physics is real, and eventually, inevitably, reality catches up.